Welcome to Planet Poetry, the podcast for poets and poetry lovers. My name's Robin Houghton.
And I'm Peter Kenny. And in each episode we feature an interview with a poet. This time it's Erica McAlpine, talking about her just-published Carcanet collection, Small Pointed Things.
Meanwhile, Peter's been getting his teeth into a new anthology of vampiric verse. He's going to give us a taste of it. And I've been roaming the streets of Paris through the eyes of an overlooked female modernist poet.
And there's a glance too at Father's Day. But before all that, let's hear what Erica McAlpine had to say to Robin.
Born in Atlanta, Georgia, Erica McAlpine is Associate Professor of English at the University of Oxford and a Fellow of St Edmund Hall. Her poetry has appeared in journals including The Atlantic, The Times Literary Supplement, The New Statesman and the Yale Review, as well as being broadcast on BBC Radio 4. Her first poetry collection, The Country Gambler, was published by Shearsman Books in 2016. An academic book, The Poet's Mistake, appeared with Princeton University Press in 2020 and was chosen by Paul Muldoon as a TLS Book of the Year. It also received the 2022 Rosemary Crawshay Prize from the British Academy. In addition to writing and teaching, Erica runs a popular reading series called Meet the Poet, which brings internationally celebrated poets to Oxford every year. Erica McAlpine, welcome to Planet Poetry.
Thank you. Hi.
You sound like you are in foreign parts, but you're not, are you? Where are you?
No, I'm in my house in Oxford. I've been living in Oxford for more than a decade, so keeping my accent, but I'm a British subject now.
Oh, congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Today we are going to be talking about your new book. In fact, it's hot off the press, isn't it? Just launched, I think.
It is. Last week, actually.
And this is Small Pointed Things from Carcanet. That's a great title.
Thank you.
I'm looking at the book and you've got these kind of origami bird type creatures all over the front, which is very distinctive. I like the idea of the things as well, because I don't know, in a workshop a long time ago, I remember someone saying, oh, you can't use the word thing in a poem, it's too general. And then, of course, there's William Carlos Williams and his No Ideas But in Things. And
that's right.
And there you go. You put it, bang, there it is in the title of the book, which I thought was great.
I know. I definitely was in that workshop too, where they said no things. But thing is a really good word. Like when we say, oh, the thing is.
Yes.
I don't know. It is both a thing and it's a kind of concept.
Yes, I agree. It's a great word.
There's also a lot of good poems that use the word something.
True.
Yeah. So
perhaps to get us into the mood of the book, you might read us a first poem. I was thinking of the very first poem in the book, actually.
That's right. Well, that's the poem in which the phrase small pointed things exists. This is a poem called Bats and Swallows. And it's sort of about a conversation between a couple who have very different perspectives on things that they see. Mm-hmm. And that kind of ends up being a running theme through the book, actually, sort of two opposing or conflicting views and how those views might come together in some way. I'll read the poem and hopefully you'll hear the title within it. Bats and Swallows. Whatever the difference might be to one who knows, we couldn't see from where we stood in soft shadows any signs that they were swallows or bats. That there were wings was without doubt. You could see small pointed things swooping out into the gloaming and sometimes back. One seemed almost iridescent as I tried to track its crescent flight across the hill. The lack of sound suggested bats to me. You strained to see if they nested somewhere below the terrace, having rested your case on swallows. We couldn't be sure either way, and so it follows that neither of us knows. But since it is in your nature always to side one way or the other, you hold that they were swallows. I say the question never gets old, that either or both hold sway.
It's kind of a detective story, isn't it?
It is a little bit. It depends whether you want to find out whether they are bats or swallows, or whether you're willing to have both as an open possibility.
And that's the fun of it, is this open possibility, I think. The fact that it's as much about the characters of the two people than the question itself.
Yeah, that's right. This is an anecdote that did happen to me. It's a story from my life about me and my husband. He hates this poem. He didn't want me to put it in the book, which is, of course, why I had to put it in and put it first.
Oh, dear. But it seems to open up a number of themes that you go on to develop. There's the workings of this relationship between two people, which comes up several times, but also the hint of this idea of change and changelings almost.
Yeah, that's right. Well, so there is the kind of central relationship in the book, questions about compatibility and incompatibility. Also the issue of how much a person could know or not know. And I hope that comes across through the book. One of the things that I think poems can or should do, some of the time anyway, is say things, is make points. The speaker of this poem needs to make a point to the person they're speaking to. Figuring out what these small pointed things are is part of it. And then also thinking about poems as small pointed things in and of themselves is part of it too.
Yeah.
And I do hope change comes to the speaker of this poem across the book. Yeah, I think there is some sense of development, character development.
Yeah, I felt that definitely. Because I knew you're American, sometimes I found myself correcting my pronunciation as I was reading the poems in my mind on some of the words. And one of them was actually this poem called, I read it as two words, after math.
That's right.
And I thought,
math, maybe I should
maths.
have said after maths.
Yeah, so I read it as after math. And I thought, maths. Yeah, that's maths. And then only after I'd read the poem, I got it as aftermath as well. But I wondered if you might read us that one.
Yeah, so this is a poem a bit about maths or mathematics, if we want to be safe in how we say it. And it's also a poem that conceptually sort of thinks about the idea of the aftermath of something. I don't normally write poems like this. I'm not very good at math, actually. But I had a friend who, I don't know how this conversation came up, but she was talking about something that this science writer had said. His name is Adam Frank, and he pointed out that the number 3 does not occur in the past of the number 5. And as a person who doesn't know much about maths, that just totally blew my mind. That 3 somehow isn't before 5. That I think we followed it up by the idea that all integers exist simultaneously. We put them in an order.
Yes.
And I got to thinking about that. I got to thinking about what leads to what consequences are versus not. And this became a really thinky poem. This is not a thing poem. This is a think poem. And actually, it's in the section of the book that I put kind of all of the thinky, more conceptual poems into.
Okay.
And it has an epigraph, which I'll read. It's the same thing I just said a second ago. Aftermath. And the epigraph is, the number 3 does not occur in the past of the number 5. Yet, what happens has consequences. This always leads to that. Fiddle with the thermostat, you get hot. Talk also incenses, though not right away. What gets said grows a little, fans and blows bit by bit, day by day, until there's a fire on your hands. You never learn how it started because everybody burns to a crisp. Plots are planned, fates are sealed, everything is perfected by strands that are connected as meaning is concealed, and you move from next to next without fully knowing the direction you're going. And there is always a subtext. So you had better pay attention to everything that gets a mention, right down to the letter.
I love that. You say it's a think poem, but you're following one image after another, and
well, that's what the poem is about, really. The math of what comes before what. It's funny to write a poem which is about things leading on to the next, and then having to deal with the issue of enjambment or the poem down the page.
And, you never learn how it started because everybody burns to a crisp. I rather like that. It sounds like a plot of a movie.
Thank you. It's pretty dark.
It's pretty dark, but, I like a bit of black humour, I suppose. And the way you finish with, so you better pay attention to everything that gets a mention. I'm thinking, oh, that's this book, everything's here for a reason.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Although this poem was sort of, again, another marriage poem in a way, thinking about conversations and how they go. And once something is said, once the 3 gets put in place, the 5 is never long to follow.
Yeah. What gets said grows a little, fans and blows bit by bit.
Yeah. Well, so this is a poem about the way fire spreads in life, spreads in a relationship. But it's also not a bad thing. I mean, I hope this poem is aware of the fire that sort of comes from desire, or the connection between fire, which is so destructive, and fire, which is kind of at the heart of feelings of desire.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a poem also in this section, in this thinky section of the book, called What Fires, which is more about desire and how it burns and also can burn out. And yeah, what you're left with is somehow the relics of the burning. Do you want me to read it?
Yes, please.
Okay. It's called What Fires. It does have a thing in it. The thing is the bougainvillea, those gorgeous sort of magenta purpley flowers you see all over Italy.
Yes, kind of climbing.
Sort of too beautiful to be real. Okay, here we are. What Fires. Bougainvillea, still trumpeting. Why do you hide 3 burnt-out matchsticks inside? What fires, long past being fanned, do you tuck away, conceal all evidence of? Lantern of spring, flower of an idea, papery past thirst, pink beyond real. Would it be so wrong to burn, heal, and still harbor love?
It's lovely, lantern of spring, a flower of an idea. For me, it was fire as purification, as healing, not just destruction. I suppose, like you say, the kind of fire that fans desire.
That's good. That's very optimistic.
Maybe.
Yeah. Well, this is a sonnet. It doesn't look totally like a sonnet because the lines are so short, but I managed to get all the rhymes in and all the ideas into the 14 lines in the end. It took me forever to write this poem. It existed in multiple forms before I wrote it, or before I finished it. But those matchsticks in the first stanza, 3 burnt out matchsticks inside, they're really the evidence of a fire that's gone out.
Yeah.
Which is why I think this is kind of a dark poem. I don't know. I mean, you have to kind of know the anatomy of a bougainvillea to really follow this, probably. But if you look at, I guess they're maybe called stamens. I'm not sure. This is where I wish I were a better botanist. But if you look inside of a bougainvillea that's blooming, there are these little stamens that I think at first have yellow flowers on them, teeny, teeny little yellow flowers. And actually the pink flowers that we see are not flowers at all. So the petals are pink, and inside they have these little yellow flowers, but then those flowers, they're short-lived and they kind of shrivel up and they end up looking like matchsticks. And it made me think about the idea of former flames, the possibility of whether former flames are purifying, as you say, or destructive. And then I started thinking about friends who couldn't get over their previous lovers. And I wrote a poem about the possibility of something really beautiful that shows evidence of the former flame, whether it would be not okay to to still harbor love, a little bit of love for what came before.
I definitely had a more hopeful reading of it, but then
I think that's good.
I didn't worry too much about the stamens of the flower. I was just kind of, would it be so wrong to burn and heal? The healing kind of got me, I think, there.
Yeah. Whereas for me, I'm still worried about the idea of having healed and yet still kind of clinging on to those matchsticks.
Oh, I see.
What does it mean to save them? Anyway, I like your reading better. It's happier.
And you spoke of another poem. Is there another poem?
Yeah, there's another poem, another kind of dark poem about the fires of desire. But this one's a translation. It's called La Farfalla, or The Moth.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a translation of one of my favorite Petrarch poems. So, Petrarch wrote all those sonnets for his beloved named Laura, who didn't love him back. And I spent a while trying to translate those poems, and they all sounded kind of medieval and antiquated. And then I sort of had a several year break, and then revisited this one and tried to bring it more into my own life. La Farfalla, The Moth. In August, out on the veranda, it is not uncommon for a moth to fly into the light and singe its wings to dust. The lantern is so beautiful, it must. I used to watch them burn and wonder why, before I came to understand the bit about desire, how there's no gentle landing, not when it comes to fire. Your eyes demanding mine, I'd fly into them every time, despite my certain harm and your regret. You look away and still I seek them out. Hell-bent on serving my affliction, I'm less bothered by my own pain than your doubt. Although I burn, I haven't perished yet.
It is lovely. So is it a direct translation then?
It is. I don't know that I'm scared to use the word direct, or all the Italianists in the world will come and get me. It definitely takes everything good that I could manage from Petrarch's poem. Anything that's not good in my poem is not Petrarch's fault. The language is modern, but the scenario is the same. He's got this moth flying into the light, into the sun, which is what he does with his beloved's eyes, and she will just have none of it. And yet he still keeps flying in them. And, you see that with insects when you're out on a patio, just totally, on a suicide mission into the thing that draws them in.
Or I do that frequently. I set out slug traps, the slugs and the snails, they love that cheap cider that I put out for them. And they go every time.
You're lucky. My slugs never go into the beer trap.
You've read us 2 sonnets so far,
Yeah.
one Petrarchian sonnet. Now, I don't know, listeners, I think will have noticed your use of rhyme. I'm saying end rhyme in my mind, but in fact, not seeing the poems on the page, I think, and the way you run over the lines when you read them out. It may be less obvious, but you do really use rhyme and metrical form. I would say it feels like in every poem.
Yeah, I think there may be no poems in this book that don't rhyme, except for the one. My translation of Bacchus and Philemon from Ovid is unrhymed, but it's in blank verse. So I did still keep the formal theme going. I find these days I can't really write without rhyme.
Well, that's interesting. So I wanted to pick your brain on this issue because I always get some flack from my podcast co-host Peter because I'm always asking poets about their use of form because it interests me. I think you're the first poet I've interviewed on here who is really wedded to the use of rhyme in a really nuanced way, but in a consistent way as well. And I'm just interested to know how that came about.
Maybe the first thing to say is it's not a new interest. I learned about poetry through rhyming poems. Mm-hmm. through fairly simple poemy poems. I don't think I was a very sophisticated early reader of poetry.
Many of us were.
So, the sing-songy poem, that was kind of what I thought a poem was. As I grew up a little, I then became very interested in poets who write in meter, Latin poets in particular. And so I started trying to write poems in fairly complicated Latin metrical patterns. And I found myself still needing to rhyme, that the poem somehow never felt finished if it didn't have the music that a rhyme offers. So it's just what makes sense to me when I look at a page and look at a poem. It's not that I don't love poems that don't rhyme. In fact, lots of my favorite poets are not rhyming poets. But for me, it doesn't ever feel like it's clicked into place unless it has that kind of sonic achievement alongside whatever it is that I might be trying to say. But the other thing is that writing in rhyme helps the poem down the page when you might not necessarily know what it is you're trying to say. Or worse, if you do know what it is you're trying to say, that's always a risk with a poem, that you try and impose meaning on a poem that wants to go elsewhere. And I find that rhymes lead the poem elsewhere, take you away from what you thought the poem was going to be about, so that it can go in the direction that it wants to go in.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, we've heard that from people who've come on here and said very similar things, in that, using form. I think it was Robert Hamburger or Mimi Calvati, talking about how form actually kind of frees you up.
Absolutely, because it has its own requirements. And so, your plans get wrecked by the plans of the form. And oftentimes it's the tension between those two things that, allows you to come up with a weird, great line that never would have been in the poem otherwise.
I really like that idea, that your plans get wrecked by the
They
form.
They do. The other thing I would say about rhyme, I've been thinking about this, is rhymes can often be very self-conscious. And I think this is the trouble with them sometimes. People read a rhyming poem and they think, oh, it's not natural. It feels contrived in some way. And you'll often hear people who critique rhymes say things like, it just felt like they did it because of the rhyme, or the rhyme changed the meaning too much. And I think that is the challenge when you're writing in rhyme. You want to make your reader feel like it's going naturally, it's growing organically. But also, rhyme calls attention to itself, knows what it's doing, is a kind of winking element. And I guess sometimes I like to think of it like watching a musical. It's not like non-musical theater where you would hope the dialogue has a kind of realism. In musical theater, the audience knows on some level that there's no way that all the characters could spontaneously sing the same song. And yet there's pleasure in that. There's pleasure in the self-conscious understanding that this is a made thing, that this was planned in some way, but also that it could coexist with something more improvisational.
I like that idea. Yeah, that's a good analogy, actually. But interesting what you said about, people will critique a rhyming poem as it sounding contrived. And yet some of the poems, even the poems you've read so far, the way you read them, it doesn't sound clunky. One could read it with a big pause after each line, as a reader might do, and think, that's a bit clunky. But then why read it that way? Lines do enjam. And
I've always thought of poetry as being read by the sentence or by the syntax of the poem rather than by the end of the line. I think it's because I love Robert Frost, and he said all those things about sentence sounds, about how the poem might sound like everyday speech, and yet it also has to somehow adhere to the rules, the principles behind it.
Yeah. And Shakespeare managed it quite well, didn't he, in the plays, really?
Well, I've never heard him read his poems, but I do think the actors who take them up manage it
exactly
really well.
I was just wondering if you might read, talking about form, you might read this poem, Kingfishers, because this is one that I looked at and I was trying to kind of parse it, and I've scribbled on the page like, oh yeah, I can see there's A, B, B, A, B, A, B, A, A.
Oh no.
I was overthinking
No,
it.
I think you were setting too high a task for yourself. Yeah, it's written in stanzas that have 5 lines. So the issue for me was 3 of the words have to rhyme and the other 2 have to rhyme. But I didn't worry too much about what order they came in. Kingfishers. I am no connoisseur of kingfishers, but one flew past me with its blue metallic armor as I crossed a railroad track. I only glimpsed its back, freckled, glossed with black, before it dove into a hedge and through. How absurd for this bird to have anything to do with trains, who lives on fish, not grains, and shares a habitat with cranes and egrets. But life gives itself over purely to whatever is near it, and then I could hear it, a river.
Thank you. Yeah, I thought that was lovely, especially with the kind of little aha at the end.
Thanks. It was the first kingfisher I'd ever seen. I really am no connoisseur of kingfishers. I was absolutely delighted to be on a walk and to see one. But as I say in the poem, I was expecting to see one on water or near water, since that's where I thought they lived. And here was one flying over the railway line. I think for me, this poem ends up representing maybe what it might feel like to be a foreigner in a place, something I know a little bit about. Not that I don't feel at home here now, but yeah, when that kingfisher showed up on a railway track, I just thought, what are you doing here, bird? Which is a feeling sometimes I have about myself. And then I was so relieved to know that actually, oh, right, its natural place was very close.
Very close, but almost, but unseen, actually, which is,
But unseen, exactly.
And while we're with nature, let's stay with that for the moment, because there's a really lovely poem right towards the end of the book called Snowdrops, which of course isn't just about snowdrops, but I'm just wondering if you might read that one for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Snowdrops. What if this virgin-colored cluster, huddled close against the cold and bluster, were all the hue a springtime field could muster? Accustomed to such deprivations, would we crave the lichen's gray and white striations, or knots of black on birches like Dalmatians, or stuff that blows in gales across the rough like hail, the pussy willow's silver fluff? Would black and whiteness be enough?
It's a stonking last line there, I think.
Thank you.
For me, the poem feels celebratory of some of the details in nature that we otherwise would miss if we had full colour, but it's also kind of an air of mourning about it.
I think that's right. I think both of those feelings are here. I mean, I think, as you're suggesting, this is a poem set in its moment. It's a kind of February poem where a person who has spent, I don't know, let's say 2.5 months of dark, dreary winter, all of December, all of January, half of February, seeing no flowers at all. It really is so relieving to see those snowdrops, isn't it? That is one thing I've experienced living here in England, is just the darkness of the days in winter and how they give way to early spring flowers. I've never been so relieved to see spring flowers in my life. You know, where I grew up, it was never that cold. You were never that far away from the relief of spring. Here, the snowdrops are just so happy making. And then I started thinking about the other things that happen around them, the way that trees that have no leaves on them might still have a kind of glistening, like birches, which even in winter have their kind of papery silver magic. And similarly, the pussy willow with all of its catkins, they really are fabulous. And I just started thinking, what if that was it? What if the crocus never arrived? The daffodil never made its big entrance? Would the relief of those snowdrops and those black and white flowers end up sufficing?
For me, it was also a kind of a metaphorical look at getting older. One sees it in one's parents, whatever. Someone whose world was full and rich and full of colour, it kind of shrinks bit by bit by bit.
That's right. Could you accustom yourself?
Maybe one has to accustom oneself to a much smaller world, but then appreciate the little details that otherwise you kind of didn't really see because you were waiting for the real colour to appear. So I thought that was very sort of melancholy, but I don't know, I enjoyed it.
That's right. It is a champion of doing as much as you can with as little as you have.
Yeah.
There's such achievement in that. I don't know the answer, though. I don't actually know if black and whiteness would be enough.
I think it would, because I think it would creep up slowly. Like every loss, every big loss is often a lot of stages of small loss that you hardly notice, like when your eyesight deteriorates or whatever.
Right.
Sorry to put the dampers on it, You've got all this joy to come, Erica.
This poem is in the death section of the book. I said there was a concept section. There's a death section, so I knew.
Yes. Oh, okay. And also, I tell you, we used to have black and white TV and it was fine. I used to watch football matches or snooker, and you could just somehow knew what colours the balls were. I don't know how.
Absolutely. And people are going to go back to that, right? Now that we have all of these high technologies, people want to listen to vinyl. They want to listen to records. And soon, we're just going to start watching black and white TV because it's so vintage. Yeah.
Let's do it.
Absolutely.
Oh, vintage and authentic. There's lots we haven't had a chance to talk about, and it's a really rich collection. I've really enjoyed it. But I wonder if you might want to tell us about anything else you're working on now. I know you've just had the launch, and I can empathise with that.
Well, I'll say I haven't finished a new poem yet, so all of it is still to come. These are the last poems I finished. I have a few things in the pipeline, but at the moment, I guess I'm thinking about whether I'm going to have a great change, whether there's going to be a sort of seismic or cosmic shift from this book, or whether, in fact, the next book will be a kind of natural small step from this one. I think I like the idea that I might be the poet who revises everything she ever did in the next collection, but I have a hunch it might be something like more of the same. But we'll see. Everything's possible at the moment because nothing is written.
Well, that's good. That's a nice place to be, I think. A blank canvas and
that's
open to whatever comes. Well, this has been terrific, Erica. Thanks so much for talking to us about your book, Small Pointed Things.
You're very welcome. It's been great fun for me.
Well, that was Small Pointed Things. I really enjoyed those poems. I couldn't help thinking that they were small pointed poems as well. There was a little bit of a sting in some of them.
Yes. There were lots of points being made here. I rather like the title as this sort of slightly self-deprecating, small pointed things, but they can pack a punch.
Yeah. Well, me being me, it was making me think of, there's a thing in philosophy. People look at the moon. It's all in different phases and different colours and all the rest of it. And we know it's the same thing, but it looks completely different. You know, her Bats and Swallows poem was making me think of that. You know, these two people looking at these half-seen things whizzing around in the sky around them. And one person's insisting it's bats and the other swallows, you know, but it may be the same thing. It's just how people perceive it.
Romeo and Juliet, you know, it is the lark. No, it's the nightingale or whatever. But funny you should say you mentioned the moon straight away, because there was a poem that Erica was going to read, and then we shuffled things a bit and then ran out of time. But that was called Some Words Between Them, and it's a beautiful poem about the moon rising and the sun sinking, and how they kind of hand over to one another, merge almost, that magical moment of dusk.
I really enjoyed the idea that she had two sections. One was the thinky poems ones, and what was it? The other was death.
Some deathy poems, yeah.
Death and thinking, yeah. That aftermath or aftermath poem, maths isn't particularly my strong point, but I was thinking about this, and it's like numbers are, again, it's all quite philosophical, kind of exist as these just principles standing on their own. You know, a 3 is a 3.
Yes, 3 isn't in the history of 5. Or
yeah. I mean, that was making my head explode thinking about that in a way. But, you know, I thought numbers have histories. I think the point is that numbers don't have histories, that they just kind of stand alone. But then she made this strange kind of sequence. So if they don't have histories and they stand alone, what is the sequence of these things unfolding?
Yeah.
It was slightly menacing as well, in a way.
Well, it's funny, isn't it, maths? I mean, yes, and although she was using it in a metaphorical way, I did enjoy that idea of numbers standing alone. It reminded me of when we first started the podcast. I had this idea I wanted to invite on a mathematician, because I've always had it in my mind that maths and poetry are related in some way, and there is something very magical.
Like music.
Well, I suppose so, but maths is something about numbers and the way that we can or manipulate them, or the way they seem to manipulate themselves. I find that extremely extraterrestrial, and there's something very otherworldly about maths, I think, and beautiful. Yeah. We didn't get a mathematician on, though, did we?
No.
Any mathematicians out there want to come on and talk about the connections between maths and poetry?
I know I was always great friends with people in the finance departments of various companies I work with.
Finance? Well, now you're dragging it down, aren't you? We're talking maths, Peter, not flipping accountancy. No offence to accountancy.
I'm deeply attracted to people that are comfortable with accountancy, because I'm not. So. But the poem about the bougainvillea.
Oh, yes.
What fires?
Yes.
They seem to me... I don't know whether it's just I've got a melodramatic cast of mind, but there was, these 3 burnt-out matches in this kind of heart of this flower. And there was something quite ominous, almost grudge-like about these burnt-out matches. It's like a relationship between 3 people gone wrong, and the way she was talking about it.
Yeah.
So I felt that we were dealing with a poem about bougainvillea and ideas and so on, but I also felt that there was a little pointed thing in there as well about relationships. I don't know. It's probably me just overlaying that.
Yes, I think that's what she was saying, wasn't it? That the idea of the matchsticks being symbolic of a burnt-out relationship, but is it really burnt out, or is it's still there inside? For me, it was another detective story. Quite a few of these poems, it felt like things were being found out or not, and it was up to the reader to find them out.
Or having found them out, what do we do about it now kind of feeling.
Yeah. And wasn't it interesting, the use of rhyme, and seeing the poems on the page and then hearing Erica read them was quite a different experience for me. I felt like I'd read things wrongly. I'd been blinded by the rhyming words and not kept myself open to the whole poem. And when she started talking about her use of rhyme and how important it is to her, it totally made sense. And I felt like I'd just been very small-minded about it,
Yeah, I like that phrase of rhyme helping the poem down the page, that sense of once you got it. And the fact that she felt there was a sense of completeness about rhyming, once all the rhymes are working, that I can totally understand that. But I like that. I think she said, or maybe it was just my note, about her plans for the poem being wrecked by the form. That once you've got this form, that, what you think the poem's about is kind of actually the form's got other ideas.
Yeah.
And that is something that's cropped up quite a few times, isn't it, on the podcast?
It has, in various shapes and form. I think the way she expressed it was unique. I hadn't heard it expressed that way before, but yes, I like that idea.
Her talking about musical theatre as well.
Yeah,
it's unreal in the way that a musical is.
Yeah.
I never thought about it that way.
No.
I've always been deeply suspicious of musicals as well, so...
It's funny, isn't it? Yes, I used to love watching old musicals, films on TV as a child. I don't know, I had a sort of funny sort of thing for Gene Kelly or whatever. But but musical theatre I've never been interested in. But when she said, actually, it is ludicrous and yet it brings such joy and such fun to the person watching it or listening to it, and how you suspend your disbelief willingly because that's part of the joy. I never had thought of that in relation to rhyming poetry, but I think that's probably absolutely true. I mean, who doesn't love a good limerick?
Yeah. Well, it's almost like a joke, isn't it? You build up the expectation of what you think the end line's going to be, and if something random comes in, it can be hilarious.
Yes. But of course, there's nothing limerick-like about Erica's poems. No. They're absolutely brilliantly constructed.
Meticulous and so effortless as well.
Yeah. Admirable stuff.
And the book was called?
That was Small Pointed Things by Erica McAlpine, and it's published by Carcanet this month, I think, or just last month. So, in other words, May 2025. So this is the part of the show when we have a little chat about what we've been reading and what's been going through our minds. And I know you have a bit of a penchant for the genre of horror, Peter.
I do.
And a little bird tells me you've been...
Or is it a little bat?
A little bat has been telling me you've been dabbling in the dark arts of blood sucking. Is that true?
Well, yes, I have got this unfortunate horror habit. I should qualify that by my real hero is this guy called Robert Aikman, who writes what he calls strange stories. So they're not kind of gory, monster-filled things, but they've just got a sense of utter unease about them. Yes, the uncanny. Yeah, and I like also Kafka as well, something like Metamorphosis I consider a horror story too.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of end of horror, really. But I've just been reading a collection which is coming out later in the year. I've sent an advanced copy, which is lovely, by Pushkin Press, and it's called White Teeth, Red Blood, Selected Vampire Verses.
Ooh.
It's got that sort of standard cover of black and shiny red, and there's a kind of silhouette of a sort of vampire type person carrying a maiden with just little fangs coming out and so on. So you get the idea, and it says poems to make your blood run cold, poems to make your heart beat faster, poems to sink your teeth into,
and other cliches.
So yeah, it's a bit of a strange collection. It's got lots of stuff from the 19th and 18th centuries. So it's got sort of Goethe and Byron and Lord Tennyson and Baudelaire and Kipling and Emily Bronte and Emily Dickinson and lots of people like that. And then there's some more recent picks that give the collection some much needed diversity from Ishmael Reed and Dorothy Baracy and John Yao, amongst others. But the definition of vampirism is quite flexible. I kind of warm to the ones that are... there's lots of poems here with vampire in the title in one way or another. But there's also poems where you're hard-pressed to, apart from it perhaps having the word vampire in the poem, to you're sort of desperately seeking vampires and blood and stuff, yeah. So it's kind of more emotional vampirism,
okay.
The sort of people that... I mean, we meet them all in real life, don't we? Those people that just...
People that suck your energy and that sort of thing.
Just by talking to them. The worst thing, I think, is when you ask yourself the question, have I been an emotional vampire? because sometimes I think I can be quite gloomy and energy sapping.
The people walk away from you white-faced.
Drained. So there's lots of good stuff in here, but...
They're going to give us a taste of it.
Yes. So I'm going to read La Belle Dame Sans Merci, which is a sort of anglicised version of that. Probably lots of Francophiles are feeling drained themselves now.
I can't laugh because there's going to be a bit of doggerel French coming out of my mouth any minute now.
So this is an example of not exactly vampire-ish stuff, but kind of encounters with people that are extremely draining. But it's just a lovely poem. Any excuse to dig out some Keats, as far as I'm concerned. Or dig up some Keats, as we're talking about.
No.
And there's also a potential trip up here. He says, she took me to her elfin grot. So I get to read it without sniggering at that point. Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms, alone and palely loitering? The sedge has withered from the lake, and no birds sing. Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms, so haggard and so woe-begone? The squirrel's granary is full, and the harvest's done. I see a lily on thy brow, with anguish moist and fever dew, and on thy cheeks a fading rose fast withereth too. I met a lady in the meads, full beautiful, a faery's child. Her hair was long, her foot was light, and her eyes were wild. I made a garland for her head, and bracelets too, and fragrant zone. She looked at me as she did love, and made sweet moan. I set her on my pacing steed, and nothing else saw all day long, for sidelong she would bend and sing a fairy's song. She found me roots of relish sweet, and honey wild, and manna dew, and sure in language strange she said, I love thee true. She took me to her elfin grot, and there she wept and sighed full sore, and there I shut her wild, wild eyes with kisses 4. And there she lulled me asleep, and there I dreamed, woe betide, the latest dream I ever dreamt on the cold hillside. I saw pale kings and princes too, pale warriors, death pale were they all. They cried, La Belle Dame Sans Merci, thee hath in thrall. I saw their starved lips in the gloam, with horrid warning gaped wide, and I awoke and found me here on the cold hill's side. And this is why I sojourn here, alone and palely loitering, though the sedge is withered from the lake, and no birds sing. So there's a bit in that where I shut her wild, wild eyes with kisses 4, which kind of makes me think she had 4 eyes.
Yeah, maybe she was wearing specs or something like that.
But I do, there is something, that kind of encounter with something that drains you and leaves you half dead. Of course, with his battle with TB and so on.
Yeah.
There is that sense of he knows all about feeling drained and worn, and the rosy cheeks kind of paling out and so on.
I can see the vampire-ish nature of the story as well, because she's not just she's draining him, but she's entrancing him, and that's part of it, isn't it? An erotic sense to succumbing to a vampire, isn't there, that you kind of can't help yourself. So in-interesting.
Yeah.
Well, you read it very well, very dramatic.
Thank you. Yeah, I do like a bit of Keats. But yeah, so for the ghoulishly inclined or the young goth in your life, this would be a marvellous purchase, I think. It's I'd say, a grounding in vampire-inflected writing.
Interesting.
I think there's another volume to be done of contemporary ghoulishness.
Yeah.
So I believe there's a Keats reference in some poetry you've been reading by a contemporary of T.S. Eliot's, a woman who didn't quite scramble over the parapets of the patriarchy at the time.
Indeed, yes. Hope Merlees. Is that a name you're familiar with?
No.
Peter?
No.
No, me neither. This book has been lent to me by a poet friend, also called Robin, another Robin. Hi, Robin, if you're listening. And this is called Paris, a poem. It's basically a book length or a long poem written by Hope Merlees. And she was indeed a contemporary of T.S. Eliot. And this poem was published in 1919. So just after the First World War and 2 years before The Wasteland.
Yeah.
I think she was quite connected to the Bloomsbury set and Virginia. In fact, this was originally published by the Hogarth Press, which was Virginia and Leonard Woolf.
So that was a pretty good start, though, isn't it? I mean...
Absolutely. She had her supporters. And in fact, they published it, they printed it off in their home on their press that they'd bought for 150 quid or something. And it had to be all typeset by Virginia Woolf, and I tell you what, that's got to be a nightmare because it's all over the page. You know, it's think of The Wasteland, and that's a sort of thing. So we've got stuff in capital letters. Sometimes it's very large, sometimes very small. We've got a lot of French with all the associated typography that you have to consider there. Sometimes it's centered, sometimes it's just doing this kind of spacey thing. So it's a typical kind of modernist piece. And it was great fun to read because I kind of took it all in one go. It's quite a few pages long, although the commentary is longer. It's more pages than the actual poem. And this edition is actually a centenary. So Faber brought it out in 2020. Yes, because it was written in 1919, published in 1920. So it came out in 2020, this anniversary edition. And it's beautifully put together.
Are they sort of her notes in the way that Eliot padded out The Wasteland?
Nothing by her. The notes have all been added for a contemporary audience to understand basically all the place names in Paris and the significance of why they're being mentioned. And it's written almost like a dream-like sequence. She is taking a walk through the city. It spans from the beginning to the end of the day. So she'll be talking about what she's seeing, and then suddenly her eye will alight on one of those, like a blue plaque, you know, like Chateaubriand died in his house or something, and makes all kinds of references to the war that's only just ended. And you can imagine the sort of state that Paris was in these days, and things that used to happen but don't happen anymore, buildings that have gone into neglect, and new things that have risen out of that era. And apparently the idea of going into trances was quite fashionable in those days. You go into a trance before you start writing, you know, automatic writing. Is that what they used to call it? That kind of thing.
Yeah, Yeats's wife did a bit of that, but it was post the First World War, people trying to get in touch with all the generations of dead people.
Spirits and yeah, very much so. And I think I suspect this was quite innovative at the time. It must have been, because people were blown away by The Wasteland, and this for me is very much in that style. There are many, many references to texts. Anyway, shall I just read you a tiny extract?
Yeah.
I'll do my best. It's not the sort of thing you can really read aloud.
Just get a flavour of
just a few lines, and then I'll explain what some of it is about.
for the people, slow people at the back, like me.
I'll tell you what, I needed the notes, I can tell you. And, so Keats' La Belle Dame is definitely referenced in here, but I've just tried to look for it and I can't find it right now. Never mind. Yeah. There is a lot of French in here, so trigger warning, you know, might be something nasty. My French accent starts to panic. Oh, there's also some music. There's some...
Will you be singing too?
I've debated that. I thought, no, I can't put our listeners through it. But there's actually two...
But you're a very good singer.
Nonetheless, it's like people who start singing pop songs in the middle of their poetry readings. Guaranteed to put people's teeth on edge. But there are two lines of music in it. So here's a little extract. In the Ile Saint-Louis, in the Rue Saint-Antoine, In the Place des Vosges, the 17th century lies exquisitely dying. Hush. And then we got these 2 lines of music. In the parish of St. Thomas d'Aquin, there is an alley called l'Impasse des Deux Anges. Houses with rows of impassive windows. They are like blind dogs. The only things that they can see are ghosts. Hark to the small dry voice, as of an old nun chanting masses for the soul of a brother killed at Sebastopol.
Yeah.
The 2 lines of music, I did recognise them. They're actually a famous aria from a Handel opera. And Hope has written underneath the music diminuendo, going down to PPP, and that means getting quieter and quieter. So the word hush comes before then. And in fact, in the explanation, it says quiet is expected for the dying. So this melancholy aria is Lascia ch'io pianga from Handel's opera Rinaldo. Let me weep for my cruel fate, and let me sigh for my liberty. And then it says, L'Impasse des Deux Anges, the blind alley of the 2 angels. Apparently, 2 angels are particularly connected with Lot and the destruction of the cities of the plain in Genesis, punished by God for homosexuality. And the name of the Impasse might also suggest lesbianism, apparently. I'm not quite sure why. Also, impasse, a blind alley, also suggests deadlock, both in French and English. The French expression for walls without windows, murs aveugles, blind walls, may have suggested the comparison with blind dogs. That gives you a teeny-weeny taste.
Because it sounded fairly straightforward when you read it. And, just all the things that are being unpacked from it.
Yeah. She's observing what's going on, but she's attaching it to myth and history and the Bible and religion and
proper modernist project then.
Very, very much so. It's really rich and fun to read.
The conceit of wandering through the city reminded me of this book I read a while ago by somebody called James Thompson, The City of Dreadful Night. And it was published in 1874 and as a book in 1888. I'm looking at the back cover now, and it says it anticipates the modern age's nightmare vision of the city as a place of loneliness, alienation and spiritual despair, in contrast to the late Victorian confidence all around him.
Interesting, yeah. I
really like this idea of, using the city as a way of telling your story. I mean, Dickens did that all the time, obviously, but, in prose. But the book you're describing, going through Paris and a story of the whole world from a few streets is rather marvellous in a way. And some of the best modernist principles in there.
Yeah. I was excited to be introduced to Ms. Hope Merlis.
Yeah. Where did she come from? Was she from the UK originally or...
English, yeah, I believe so. Yes. So Hope Merlis, 1887 to 1978.
Oh, bloody hell. Yeah.
Good long life. Was a British translator, poet and novelist. She published 3 novels in her lifetime. 3 slim volumes of poetry, which culminated in Moods and Tensions in 1976.
Wow.
So she was writing right through the 20th century. Amazing.
I'd be interested to
dig that out.
Some more of her stuff out. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes I wonder who's writing today that we don't know about, and then 100 years' time they're going to be hailed as a great talent that was overlooked for whatever reasons.
This time of year we're coming up to Father's Day. Do you remember that as a kid at all? Because I don't.
No, I don't, frankly. We always have Mother's Day or Mothering Sunday.
Yeah.
I wonder whether Father's Day is a slightly newer construct. Certainly, I think there's now Grandparents' Day, isn't there? That's got to be a new... Yeah, that's got to be a new one.
I've always been a bit dubious about it because my feelings about Father's Day are a little complicated. But any cause to celebrate is a good thing, I think.
Absolutely, yes.
One of our good friends of the podcast, who's been a great supporter of ours, Tim Relf, poet and novelist and general good egg, has sent us a really cheerful Father's Day poem. And I think it would be really nice to end on something that's kind of, affectionate and warm. about fathers. It's full of references to sort of English television of a certain time. So
What, like oldsters like us going to recognise references? Or
we will, yes. It's called Johnny Morris Reminds Me of My Father. It's the hair, the forehead, even the jacket he's wearing in that Parkinson clip on YouTube. Remember the voices? Dad did them once for a family of ducks. Had us in hysterics, absolutely howling, and him, Johnny Morris, saying how lonely zoo animals get at Christmas because nobody's there. Richard Briers has the same effect. With him, it's the eyes, the woolly jumpers. Didn't Dad call them sweaters? The big collar shirts, slim, but a suggestion that, given time, he'd flesh out. In the 80s, the old man was forever watching The Good Life. At least the first half of the 80s. Leonard Rossiter, too. Maybe it's the nose. Ironic, really, because I seem to recall Dad hated Rising Damp. He'd probably find it funny that I reckoned he looked like Rigsby. Or would he? Even John Updike once, peeking out at me in a second-hand bookshop, something in the shoulders and size of the man. Mostly, though, they're not famous, these men who rest a hand on my shoulder and call me champ or ace. They reach out on trains or in Tesco or glass-walled meeting rooms, and so it is today, Father's Day, when a stranger in Stafford services stops me dead. It's the smile, spontaneous, boyish, mischievous, endearing qualities in a man that age, 50-something, the age my father will always be.
Oh.
So yeah, a father remembered with affection. How nice.
Very much so. What a rogues gallery, that Leonard Rossiter, Richard Briers.
Well, they're all kind of, sort of warm figures on telly, weren't they, at a certain time?
Thank you, Tim, for sending that to us.
Nice one.